Destiny has been my favorite game of all time, and now every time I boot it up, I kind of dread playing it. There's always been something special about this game. It combines fluid gameplay that feels almost like an upgraded version of Halo with an immersive environment across the galaxy and a seemingly endless list of things to do and loot to chase. 9 years ago, the Crucible instantly hooked me. It felt like the best parts of so many of my favorite FPS games, but with these amazing abilities that added even more intrigue. The gunplay feels so amazing and so satisfying that just the feeling of getting a little bit better each day was reason enough for me to spend thousands of hours in the game. Personally, I fell in love with sniping, and to this day I'm still absolutely hooked on the basic premise of just clicking on my opponents from afar. The movement is also incredibly good, and people spend seasons on end mastering techniques to outplay their opponents. The artwork and the planets are incredible. I remember spending hours exploring every last inch of the original Destiny 1 planets just looking for secrets and trying to glitch out of the map to explore it even beyond whatever Bungie intended for us. Running my first Destiny raid is an experience that I will never forget. I didn't have any background in MMO games, so taking on the Vault of Glass with 5 of my friends and bashing our heads against the wall while fighting powerful enemies and losing against the same bosses over and over again was like discovering gaming for the first time. Watching Atheon finally die after hours of failing alongside my buddies is easily a top 5 gaming experience in my life. The past nearly decade of playing this game has been generally awesome. I've made more friends than I can count, and it's given me the gift of a career in content creation that I never could have imagined. I'm truly so grateful for every single one of you who has followed me on this journey. And yet, for the past several months, it feels like that spark's been really fading. As my friend TDT put it, it feels like the game has been dying a death by 1,000 cuts. Lately, it feels like the game has no soul, and that really breaks my heart to say this. Sure, we could talk about the blatantly obvious issues here, like how the servers have been complete garbage for months now. When I've tried recording footage for videos lately, it's almost impossible to play an entire game without the D2 servers letting you know that they're struggling to stay connected. Or we could talk about how you just routinely can't log in at all for extended periods of time. My poor video editor has been working on our new player guide for months, and he's routinely sending me messages on Discord about how the servers are down every single time he needs to log in and pull some asset. And when you actually can play, especially in PvP, the connections are atrocious. The lag has been unreal. I really can't recall a period in the last 9 years where the server stability has felt this bad. Then of course there's the price to actually play the game as a new player. Aztecross just covered this in a video that blew up on YouTube, and for good reason. When I try to get friends to play the game, they can't believe how expensive it is for a free-to-play game. But for me, the deeper problem is actually the growing level of apathy that I notice in myself and friends who've been playing for years. It's hard to keep things interested in a nearly 10-year-old game, I get that. We've been following the same story for ages, and you can only reskin a better Devils so many times before people just completely lose interest in chasing the loot. Besides, one better Devils is going to be the best one anyway, so at that point, why grind for anything else? Sunsetting was one of the attempts that Bungie had, but that's gone horribly wrong for obvious reasons. You don't get players to play more by forcing them to grind stuff in activities that they don't want to play in the first place. You gotta give your players a better environment to enjoy the fruits of their labor in different ways. Think about how CSGO is doing just fine with the same old guns after all of these years. They're satisfying to use, and you spend most of your time just striving towards mastery of the weapons. In Destiny, you have to go through the entire process of farming, hoping you get the gun that you want, and then you have to spend that time learning it while at the same time praying that Bungie doesn't nerf it or introduce something new that's more powerful. Even though there are now more exotics to chase than ever, and even though the list of god-rolled guns to acquire is massive and we have tons of raids and dungeons to grind, I still have never felt less motivated to play the game. For me, I think this downward spiral actually started with Beyond Light. It's not that I thought it was even a bad expansion. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, but it marked a point of departure in Destiny. It was a true shift of focus away from PvP and exclusively towards PvE. And I don't even necessarily think this was a bad decision to make. I've always felt like Destiny's PvE is special and it has tons of missed potential. And maybe that's even because it was split between the different modes. But Destiny's PvP is always the thing that kept me coming back in the slower periods when PvE got really boring. I mean, after all, PvP is infinitely replayable and variable because the opponents themselves change. It's the reason that games like Counter-Strike have been popular for decades even without too many fundamental changes. The way that Stasis was tuned for Beyond Light just screamed that Crucible was no longer a focus of the game. Not only was it unbelievably broken, but it took months before significant changes were made to take it down to some reasonable level. They effectively let the PvP community bleed out while getting Shatter Dive dunked, slowed, and frozen for months. The ability balance ever since Beyond Light has fundamentally changed, and not in a good way in my eyes. Destiny has been in an arms race for more and more ability spam. Do you remember Wormhusk? Originally this was introduced as an exotic in Season 3 which gave you instant healing just for dodging. This was pretty broken at the time. Well, after nearly a full season of community complaints, Bungie finally gave in and nerfed it to only give a little sliver of health. But remember, this was in year 1, and back then you could only use a few Paragon mods which would help your dodge come back faster. So effectively, the dodge cooldown was much longer than it is today. But when Solar 3.0 got introduced, we got a mod that did exactly the same thing. You could just dodge for free health regen, the exact same thing as Wormhusk, but without requiring an exotic. And it wasn't just hunters experiencing this level of power creep. Titans got a helmet that instantly healed them and gave them a damage buff at the same time just for getting weak. I guess we're supposed to accept that this is balanced and fair. And in all honesty, it kind of is, at least compared to what we have at our disposal in the game right now. I feel like if you showed a year 1 gamer the current state of abilities, they would immediately point out how insanely broken they all are. I mean, Child of the Old Gods might not seem too crazy to you right now, but think about this. It's a personal agent that goes out and seeks your opponents and weakens them while also dealing damage and gives your abilities back. When has that ever been a thing in a video game? And don't forget, you can't shoot it in a fight and you can't really run from it because it'll just find you around walls. This would have been the most powerful ability in the game back in year 1 by a long shot, and today it just seems like par for the course. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against abilities per se. In fact, I actually really like them. I believe they're a core part of Destiny and the Destiny experience, just like they're a core part of a game like Overwatch. But just like you can ruin a dish with too much spice, you can ruin a game with too many low skill, high reward abilities, and that's definitely been happening in Destiny 2. Bungie advertised to us a focus on less but more impactful abilities. Just like sunsetting was a bad fix to the power creep issue, this idea also was the exact opposite of what we really want. Think about it, by definition, more impactful means harder to counter and lower skill, which is just horrible for an FPS game where greater skill should always prevail. It's kind of getting to the point where it feels like Bungie's doing everything they can to annoy the player base. I mean, just look at their godlike speed when patching any bug that benefits the player versus their response time when the game is literally unplayable. At this point, I'm sure many of you watching will probably be thinking, well yeah, PvP, fair enough, but it's a PvE game anyway. And lately, you might be right. But for most of Destiny 1, PvP kept the game alive. There were spans of months where there was basically nothing at all to do in PvE, and instead people would grind out trials every weekend. It kept the game going on Twitch and YouTube in some of the darkest periods. I watched Glad's recent video about PvP, and I actually agree with most of his takes. I think at this point, anyone holding out hope that PvP will just magically get better probably is delusional. But without it, the game feels so hollow. I love PvE, I really do. I think raids are probably the single best part of Destiny. Dungeons are awesome too, and I can grind light level and farm for drops just like any other degenerate gamer out there. But I always feel myself returning back to the same core question. Why? Why bother? In other games, the loot alone feels like a worthwhile thing to chase. In Diablo, for example, getting that one missing piece of your build will skyrocket you to completely new DPS potential. Other games allow you to gain astounding amounts of skill, so much so that long after the end of their support, people still come back again and again just to work on their skill, and to make that 1% better play for the thrill of just beating a slightly better opponent. Think about Smash Bros. Melee. For years now, the meta keeps changing even though the game was literally printed on a GameCube disc with effectively no changes for decades. StarCraft, for example, just had a big jump in popularity again, even though there haven't been many changes over the last few years. The player base's skill keeps growing and the enjoyment of the game keeps providing more and more epic moments worth investing all that time for. But in Destiny, does anything really matter? Even if you do min-max your character with perfect stats on every single armor piece, and you get the best possible weapon rolls, does that enable you to do anything that you really couldn't do beforehand? I really doubt it. Destiny lacks any aspirational content that makes you want to get better and better at the game in the first place. With the one exception being PvP on paper, it's a natural environment for endless improvement. And technically, you should be able to keep replaying PvP over and over again for more new experiences, but now it feels more neglected than ever. I really feel for the hardcore PvE players because after the world's first race is over, there's really not anything meaningful to chase for 6 months. I mean, do you really want to be speedrunning boring strikes over and over again? Does that sound like engaging gameplay to you? Other games have content that really pushes you to do incredibly difficult things and rewards you for that effort. In Elder Scrolls Online, there's a title some of my friends earned that requires you to do the hardest raid in the game in a speedrun while also doing it flawlessly. It's a feat that's only accomplished by an incredibly small number of players, and when you see that Godslayer title in the game, you know it really meant something special. And perhaps at some points, Destiny has had this. Unbroken was pretty coveted when it first came out, but after years of watering it down with nerfs to the comp system, it's basically meaningless now. But in PvP, we've always been able to chase improvement for the sake of just getting better. And your main reward was being able to tangibly feel that improvement by how you performed in the game. You get to make sick plays, get montage clips, and have a great time with and against your fellow Guardians. But now, you launch PvP to just immediately get shoulder charged through a wall, or sniped through flinch, or damage glitched by an SMG, or just movement skill gapped by some laggy teleporting player. You can barely spend 10 minutes inside of PvP without being reminded of just how horrible the netcode and servers have become these days. My favorite part about creating videos for all of you was being able to share things that help you improve just a little bit. Those are still some of my favorite videos and comments even years later. To be completely honest, if PvP was in this state back when I first started making videos, I probably wouldn't be a YouTuber today. I don't think I would have had the drive to teach those things. If you load into a random PvP game today, it feels like the ability spam is more important than the gunplay that I fell in love with 9 years ago. The connections are so awful that you don't know if you're missing your shots or they're just vanishing in thin air. And cheaters are back in droves, making trials nearly unplayable. It's even driven away creators like Jake, who have been streaming trials carries since the beginning. People are obviously frustrated with the game, and that's showing big time. More and more players have had their friends quitting the game, and it's becoming harder to get motivated to play when there's not even that social aspect to it anymore. And on top of all this, many of the rewards are insanely time and RNG gated. The one gun that I really want most of the season, which keeps me coming back to the game even in this state, is one that I can't even get unless I get incredibly lucky. Of course, I'm talking about the new sniper from the competitive playlist. Ever since I started playing Destiny 2, I wanted to have a snapshot, opening shot, 40 zoom sniper in the energy slot, and the one time Bungie finally adds it, it's literally impossible to get right now. Well, I guess impossible to farm at least. You have a fixed number of tries each week, and if you're unlucky, you will never see this roll. And then of course FOMO will strike again and the gun will be removed from the loot pool for many seasons to come. I'm starting to ask myself, why even bother? Maybe it's better to just not even go for the gun than to go for it and not get it and then have to suffer the pain of FOMO until it finally comes back. And there's no guarantee that it's even coming back in the first place, or that it will even come back with the same perk combinations. Think about the Eye of Soul. That one did come back, but now you can't even get any of the great combinations from back in the day like opening shot and snapshot. I know you don't have to say it, and this is a complaint video, and I also hate to be negative, but I feel like it's my duty as a content creator to at least bring these issues to people's attention, and I hope that some people in Bungie would maybe see this. Maybe I'm delusional and maybe there's no hope for this game that I love, but I'm going to keep poking at it and hoping that it at least does something. I've watched a lot of videos from friends critiquing the game lately, and the whole thing just makes me sad and honestly a bit worried about the future. This spring marked my 4th year covering the game on YouTube. I still have a lot of videos that I plan to make, and I'm not sure exactly what the future holds. I'm sure Bungie will bring out the hype machine again in August with the showcases for what's to come, and I truly do hope they turn this thing around. I don't like making this kind of video, and I'd really prefer to cover things I'm excited about, but I feel like this kind of thing has to be done from time to time. I've also been seriously experimenting with other games lately and evaluating which ones might be a good fit for me as a content creator. It's really scary switching away from a community that's treated me so well and a game that's made me so many friends, especially when that means going into some unknown abyss for a different game or even a different genre. This truly is my passion, and I love making content for you guys, and I'm going to keep doing it. I'd really love if I could keep doing it in Destiny, but if Bungie's going to make it impossible to continue that journey, then I might have to end up going on a different path. But don't worry, regardless of what I end up covering, I'm not going anywhere. I'd really love to hear your input on this, especially if you've been a longtime fan, but even if you're newer, it would mean a lot to me if you just take a second to type out what kind of content you'd like to see from me and how you feel about the state of the game right now. If you want to watch another video from me, maybe check out a conversation I recorded with some friends about why they stopped playing Destiny a little bit later last year. It's linked on screen and in the description.